This is The Civil Fleet, the podcast focused on the activist-led refugee rescue and support missions across Fortress Europe, with me, Ben Coles. In today's episode, we speak with Agustina Oliveri, campaigns manager at the UK-based human rights organisation Freedom from Torture. Agustina talks to us about Freedom from Torture's amazing campaigns against the British government's plans to exile asylum-seekers to Rwanda. She tells us that they've done this mainly by targeting the airlines that are willing to do the UK government's dirty work. They have done some amazing stuff, and it's absolutely great to have talked to Agustina for this episode, so I hope you enjoy it. So as usual, before we get into today's podcast, I'd like to remind you that The Civil Fleet is not just a podcast, it's also a news blog with interviews, exclusive stories, and all kinds of things. So go to civilfleet.com for more. That's civilfleet.com. Check us out on social media and all that stuff too, and share us around if you like. Also, The Civil Fleet is an entirely grassroots project that is run by me. We've not sold out. I've not got any adverts in this podcast. I hate when podcasts have lots of adverts in. So this one doesn't. But if you want to help us to continue to platform the amazing activists, the refugees, the lawyers, the campaigners, the journalists, the amazing people that we've had on this podcast, then you can make a small donation. You can buy me a coffee, or you can help buy me a Ferrari if you like. Though obviously you don't need to do that. But if you would like to donate, you can go to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. Our costs are really small. Doesn't cost me very much to keep this podcast going, but any help you can give us will be greatly appreciated. And one last thing before we get into the episode. I've just been in Bosnia with an organisation called No Name Kitchen. They've been on the podcast a few times. I did a bunch of interviews with the awesome activists there, and I will be sharing all of that in the next episode of the podcast, which should hopefully be out in either later this month or more likely early June, because I have a lot of stuff to get through. So yeah, look forward to that. Okay. Oh yeah, and one last thing. When we did this interview with Agustina, I was really tired. I'd just come back from Bosnia. I was in a hotel in Zagreb in Croatia, and I had made a few mistakes, as you'll be able to hear. And I kept referring to one of the airlines, or one of the airline organisations, as Air Tank, but it's actually called Air Tanker. I didn't notice until I started editing this, and I thought, bloody hell. Anyway, so yeah, it's Air Tanker, not Air Tank, which I keep saying. Right, that's enough from me. Let's get on with the episode. All right, Agustina. Is that how we say it properly? Augustino or Augustina?
Yeah, Agustina. But
Augustina.
Yeah, Agustina's fine.
Augustina, thank you very much for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
It's really good to get someone on from Freedom from Torture. I've recently been in touch with Freedom from Torture a lot in emails for different stories that I'm working on. So it's really good to speak to you. And today we're going to talk about Freedom from Torture's campaigns against the Rwanda policies that's happening in the UK. And I really like the stuff you've been doing about Jet2 and Air Tank and these kind of things. So we'll talk about that. So before we get started, could you tell us about yourself, Agustina? How you ended up getting involved in this kind of stuff? What's your role at Freedom from Torture and this kind of thing? Give us a background about yourself.
For sure, yeah. So, yeah, my name is Agustina. I'm originally from Argentina. And I think that's kind of like determined a lot me getting into this kind of work. I got into volunteering and services when I was really, really young, just because, as you might or might not know, Argentina has a very big amount of poverty and massive kind of like people that need support that the government just doesn't give. And that happened when I was young, and that keeps happening to this day. So it was instilled from when I was very young that if you had a bit of privilege, you share that around. And that's what basically led me to volunteering with my dad when I was really young, to studying, international relations and human rights law, and going to work on Samos for a grassroots organization working with refugees in 2018. And what basically finally led me to Freedom from Torture now, where I'm the digital campaigns manager. So I run all of our campaigns, kind of like public facing campaigns.
And how long ago did you move to the UK?
So I moved to the UK in a very rogue move in September 2020, so mid-pandemic. But I figured it'd be a good idea, and luckily it's paid off.
Great time to move.
Yeah, it was a very weird time to move. But yeah, again, I count my blessings that luckily it paid off. But yeah, so about 4 years now.
And I'm just like, as we've been talking before we started recording, I really like your accent. It sounds, I wouldn't have guessed you were from Argentina before you said it. Kind of, your accent sounds kind of like Southern England, but also sometimes Scottish, sometimes Northern Ireland. It's really nice.
Do you know what? I've been asked if I'm Irish, and I've never been to Ireland. I'd love to go. And I'm sure that my accent is now a zombie kind of like mashup of things that I picked up along the way and being here long enough. I found myself the other day saying mate to someone unironically, and I messaged lots of friends being like, I made it. This is it. Like, I'm fully integrated now. But yeah, it's a full mashup of just different things that I've picked up along the way.
No, it's nice. It's really nice. It does sound like it could be from Belfast or something. Or, you know, you lived there for a while and now you moved away. Anyway. So, yeah, we're not talking about Samos, the Samos Volunteers, which I think you said then, or we talked about before we started recording. But just, can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, for sure. So I was seeing that, you know, the refugee crisis was picking back up in 2018. Felt quite helpless from Argentina, decided to quit my job basically and send an email to Samos Volunteers and ask if I could go. Thankfully they said yes. And I ended up on Samos, which is a tiny island in the Aegean Sea, very close to Turkey, that had a camp built for 645 people. But ultimately, in the time that I was there, ended up having over 8,000 people within the camp. So that meant that the camp was, you know, completely overcrowded with horrifying living conditions. And I was there leading on anything communications and advocacy, but also leading on things like our women's space and a women's centre, because as you can imagine, that is an inhospitable place for everyone living there, but especially for women who had no access to, you know, toilets or safe places. So I was there for around 10 months, a bit over 10 months, just trying to do as much humanitarian support as we could, and also making sure that what was happening on Samos actually got somewhere around kind of like in the world, making sure that it got to, you know, it was broadcast and people knew what was happening. Because again, it is quite a tiny island and people didn't really know that there were so many people trapped. Because obviously, because of the EU-Turkey deal coming in 2016, people got trapped in these kind of like port of entries, as they got called, which were completely unfit for that purpose. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. I'd highly recommend to people to go volunteer at refugee camps if they can, because it's still, the situation is still dire and numbers and people are still needed.
And is the Samos Volunteers are still going, right?
They're still going strong despite the Greek government making sure that, you know, the situation for NGOs gets progressively harder in Greece, but they're still going strong and adapting kind of like to the ever-changing needs of the population on the island, yeah.
I'll put some links to the show notes, and for people listening, they can look at their phone and their notes. They should be able to find links to how to join that and more about them. Thanks for that, Agustina. That was really interesting. Can you tell us now about Freedom from Torture? I know it's quite a big campaign. I've been in touch with them a lot over the last especially the last couple of weeks, but also over the last few years about really depressing stories that I've written. Can you tell us, about it? What is Freedom from Torture campaign on and this kind of things?
For sure, yeah. So Freedom from Torture is a really interesting organization to work for, and obviously I might be biased because I work for them, but it's really rare that when you work in the humanitarian sector, you get to work for an organization that does both frontline work and really good campaigning. You usually get one or the other. And with Freedom from Torture, I think we get really lucky that we do both. So one strand of Freedom from Torture focuses on clinical work. We're one of the biggest torture rehabilitation centers in the world, and that is spread out across kind of like 5 centers across the UK and Scotland. So you have, clinical, you have clinicians, you've got pain management people, you've got different professionals kind of like supporting torture survivors through the horrifying things that they've gone through now that they've reached safety in the UK. And on the other hand, you also have massive amounts of campaigning and policy work. So we campaign on things, like the Rwanda scheme, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But we've also campaigned, we campaign overall for a fairer and better, world and system for torture survivors and refugees. But we also campaign for torture accountability. So the role that the UK has to, uphold things like the torture ban, or the role of the role of the UK in keeping British overseas troops accountable for torture. So we focus on lots of different things. But what's really beautiful, the way that I view it's really beautiful, it's that it's quite full circle in the sense that people come through our clinical centres and get support, through clinicians and through our other services. And then they're able to join the organisation through our survivor empowerment project. So we have lots of different groups made up of survivors and run by survivors that get involved in our campaignings. In our campaigns, we like to say that our campaigns are survivor-led. And that's because we work hand in hand with different survivors that, want to get involved, because lots of them don't, but for some of them, it's really empowering. So we work with them hand in hand to then address the underlying issues, like, the hostile system that the UK has, to make sure that for other survivors, hopefully, it'll be a bit better. But that's kind of like a long-winded way of what Freedom from Torture does. And we do so much more than that. I mentioned our clinicians, but we also have, MLR doctors that provide specialist reports for people's asylum cases on, their torture and what's happened to them, because lots of times it's invisible to the naked eye. So what those repercussions, what effects they had on their bodies and on their mental health. We have a great team of lawyers and welfare supporters that, support survivors when they get to the UK, to liaise with a council, which we already know is really hard. So liaise with a council, liaise with GPs or the NHS. So we have quite a big group of professionals trying to support people on their way to recovery and to safety once they get here. And then we try and kind of like feed all of that knowledge into our campaigning. And into the work that we do through our policy and campaign teams.
Yeah, I think you said MLR doctors there. Is that what you said? And if so, what is an MLR doctor?
Yes.
So an MLR doctor is a medical legal report doctor. So for things like your asylum claim, you are sometimes asked to provide a report, a medical report that, backs what you are saying that's happened to you. They're really difficult to get. So what our voluntary doctors do is go through this process with survivors that need these reports on, what's happened to them, what things they have gone through, and making sure that these are documented in a way that is kind of like medically exact and medically appropriate, so that then survivors can go back to the Home Office and go back to their, asylum interviews with this paper that kind of like backs what they're saying, which shouldn't be the case that it's needed, but in lots of cases it is. So they provide that kind of like extra step in validating things for the Home Office, so hopefully their journey through the asylum system is a bit easier.
Because I think my understanding of the asylum system is it takes a very long time for asylum applications to go through. People can be waiting in limbo for a long time, and a story I just published on the Silver Fleet was about the numbers of asylum seekers dying, the numbers of people dying in UK asylum accommodation. It's really, really sad. So I don't know many details about those people that died, only the details that the Home Office released, but you can imagine that some of them have been through some really awful things. And like I said, Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say exactly. And I think now more than ever, they're so important because they're also used, for example, to try and make sure that torture survivors are put in accommodations that aren't triggering for them. So, for example, that they don't share rooms, or that they, are not placed very far away from their family, or where their support system is. And now, especially with the UK government creating more and more horrible things like the Bibby Stockholm, which if people haven't heard of it, it's a barge basically that has been fitted to house an enormous amount of asylum seekers and refugees. And it's just literally docked on a port in almost the middle of nowhere. So trying to make sure that these reports also help, torture survivors to not end up in those kind of places, even though nobody should end up in those kind of places. But trying to help, to make sure that doesn't happen is something that we, 2 years ago would have never thought that we'd have to campaign or think about. And now we're basically having to make sure that, torture survivors don't end up on a barge in the middle of nowhere with no support whatsoever.
Yeah, the Bibby Stockholm is just unreal. Like, I keep forgetting about it. And then, but periodically when I think about it again, I'm like, God, I just can't believe it. That's a real situation. We've done an episode on that before. I don't remember which episode it was, but it was with a group called Reclaim the Sea. And I'll have links to that in the episode notes. Yeah, and then also people, I think the UK government is still keeping people in like former RAF, former military bases as well, right? I think Wethersfield is one, and I can't remember the others, but there's quite a few, right? And that must be like, particularly if you've been tortured by the military in a different country, then you get put in a military base. That can be really traumatic, right?
Yeah, people are being put in horrifying accommodation conditions, and it ranges anywhere from, because people hear the word hotels and they imagine, a lovely stay at a hotel, and that couldn't be further from the reality of what asylum seekers and refugees are facing. But yeah, they're being put in hotels, they're being put in these RAF bases, they're being put in the barge. It's just, there doesn't seem to be an end to kind of like the horrifying places that they're being housed in right now.
Yeah, the thing I was just going to say about the hotels, like I'm in a hotel right now, and it's lovely, really nice hotel. But then I've not been tortured, I've not gone on a really long journey, I've got a job. These asylum seekers that are in these hotels have no support generally, right? And I've spoken to a journalist again on the podcast, Nicola Kelly, and I don't remember which episode that was, but I'll link to it, where she found people being abused by. In a hotel that were being abused by members of staff, or staff that weren't trained at all to deal with, people who might have been tortured, or people who've been on these epic journeys to reach safety. It's just wild. And yeah, and like a lot of right-wing press or right-wing actors and stuff also, I think in their minds, these asylum seekers are staying in the Ritz, staying, like in the top, the penthouse suite or whatever, but it's not like that at all.
Exactly. And look, I've got friends that have stayed in these hotels, and it's 4 or 5 people to a room. It's cold, meal deal sandwiches for every meal, and curfews, and having to sign in and out. So it's definitely not a Ritz stay, unfortunately.
What was I going to ask? It was about that. So what kind of, like I just said before we started recording, I've just spent the last 2 weeks or so in Bosnia. I'm going to have an episode on that in a few, hopefully this month soon. And I've met some people that had experienced torture or experienced like really traumatic journeys. I also met people who probably won't, like, from what they told me, it doesn't sound like they would qualify as to be able to get refugee status, but still, like, they shouldn't be forced on this journey that they're going through. And in my opinion, they should be able to free to work wherever they like. I can work wherever I want, so should they. It's just my passport that allows me to go wherever I want. And I forgot what my point was. I didn't mean to just start talking there. Oh, my point was, so the people that come, it's a lot of, is it mainly asylum seekers and refugees, people on the move that you speak with, or do you also have like British people that are British passport holders, I guess, that have experienced torture or things like that?
I'd say our client base is mostly people escaping war and persecution, so it's mostly refugees and asylum seekers, and that's why Freedom from Torture has kind of veered lots of our campaigns into campaigning for a fairer asylum system. It's because we see that that's such an integral part in campaigning for our clients. So we have clients, we have from a wide range of countries, but places like Sri Lanka, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan. I believe we have had one British client. I'll have to recheck my numbers, but I'm like 99% sure that that's kind of like the number that I've been given. But it's mostly people coming and fleeing some sort of war or persecution or torture.
And have your clients, is that the term you use? Sorry, clients.
So we use the word clients, because I think the way that our clinicians approach their services is very, focused on psychology and focused on them being, their clients there. That's kind of like the way we talk about the people that are going through our support.
I think it's a good term. That's the story that Freedom from Torture just commented on, that story I published last on the civil fleet. It was surprising to me that the Home Office refers to all the people in its accommodation as customers or service users. It just feels so dehumanizing to me.
That is insane. I think there's been a good shift by lots of the humanitarian sector in moving away from service users. And I'm quite happy to see that.
But yes, your clients, so any of your clients, I think you mentioned this just a little bit ago, that some of them may have faced abuse or torture even from British forces abroad, British soldiers, maybe in Afghanistan or wherever, even US or wherever. Have you had this happen as well? Can you talk about any of those cases?
So we don't really talk a lot about kind of like what our clients have gone through, especially ongoing clients, just because we want to make sure we preserve their identity. So I wouldn't be able to give any kind of like revealing information of the things that they've gone through. But what I can say is that most people have gone through state torture, so have been tortured by states, be their own state, neighboring states, conflicting states. And they have been tortured for a variety of different reasons. So from political dissent to being part of an LGBTQI plus community or a religious group. So kind of like the reason, if you want to put it that way, of and the who of the torture behind for most of our clients differs into lots of different categories. But yeah, we don't give out very specific discerning descriptions just to keep them safe, because lots of them and most of them are still going through an asylum system and are still going through kind of like their paperwork and making sure they're secure within the UK legal system, and they're secure in the UK is our main priority.
No, I can understand that. I've met all these people in Bosnia the last few days, and there's a part of me, I think the journalist inside me is like, tell me everything, I want all the details. But then, the human in me is like, don't ask, don't push these things on them, right? So I understand that. Let's
yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I understand. It's just the mean journalist in me wants to know all the details. So we're going to talk about one of your campaigns that you're running in a few minutes. But let's talk about we're going to talk about the Rwanda Safety Act, which it is now, I think. Neither of us are experts in this, but we'll just give like a surface sort of overview of it. So my understanding is that this started with a couple Home Secretaries ago. We've had many Home Secretaries in the UK in the last 2 or 3 years. Priti Patel came up with this idea of deporting people who arrive into the UK by crossing the channel or overstay their visa or whatever. They will deport them to Rwanda. And I remember when it first started being talked about, I thought this was completely insane. Like, where is this idea even come from? I think Australia does this with people who arrive on boats and they send them to an island, which I can't remember the name of. Do you know that more about that one?
I can't remember the name of. I just know that it's based on basically what Australia does. Yeah, in that island that's like quite close to the coast, but I'm just not 100% sure where it is.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think it's not even Australian territory. I think it's is it like an independent small country? But that sounds really mean. But yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember the details about it. We'll have show notes about that. That's the great things about podcasts. So this is the Rwanda bill, and I think it got through to Parliament. There was many battles with the House of Lords, which is really complicated. We don't need to go into that. But then the High Court, the Supreme Court in the UK decided that Rwanda was not a safe place to send asylum seekers. And then the government have recently just changed the law to make it possible that Rwanda is a safe country, and now they want to do it. And then they recently, the Home Office, within the last few days, have been sharing videos of people being picked up by the police, and they're going to be sent to Rwanda, apparently. Which is fucking grim. I did mention that you can swear on this podcast if you like, Augustina.
Oh.
You don't have to, but if you want to, you can swear, and I will. So yes, so it was. Is that what you think? Is that your understanding of the Rwanda the thing, or is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good kind of like 60-second whistle-stop tour of it. But it's basically, I think the way that I view it is, yeah, I think it was back in early 2022 that they just showed up and were like, yeah, so we're going to send asylum seekers and refugees to Rwanda without looking at their claim first. So they're not going to be able to do, what is enshrined in the UN, Refugee Convention. So what they're due by, and what the UK is bound to by international law because they are signatories of that treaty. And we're just going to send them to Rwanda and they can get their asylum heard there. And I remember we all just went a bit like, what? And then obviously, you had the flight that almost happened in July 2022, which we can talk about in a bit because we campaigned really heavily about that. And then it started going through the courts. And then back, I think it was end of November last year when the Supreme Court came out with this like really succinct, ruling being like, this is not a safe country for refugees. We think the scheme is illegal. It was a really weird one because whenever we win, it's a bit of like a dog trying to catch its tail. It's a bit of like, what is happening? What do you mean this has actually happened? So when that happened, we're like, oh my God, amazing, great. And if you'd asked me then if we'd be campaigning against the Rwanda scheme in May 2024, but I'd be like, no way. The Supreme Court has just, killed it, crushed it. And then the way that I view, the Rwanda bill, the safety of Rwanda bill, whatever name we're trying to use for this kind of like inhumane emergency legislation that they put in, is the UK government just looking at, the ruling of the Supreme Court, the ruling of, the UN, the European Court of Human Rights, millions of people across the world, and just looking at it and being, no, don't like it, don't care. And literally jumping over it with this legislation, with this treaty that they're getting, right now ratified with Rwanda, and just being like, we're just going to do it anyway. And we don't care what any of you has to say. We don't care it's controversial. We don't care that, hundreds of thousands of people, MPs, lords, celebrities, the king have spoken out about it. They're like, no, we don't care. We're just going to, go ahead and jump over it and keep going, which is absolutely insane and, completely against morality, but also completely against international and domestic law, which is insane.
Yeah, and it's like, it's just so horrific. It's so horrific. I can't believe that they want to do this and they're forcing it through. But it's also like ridiculously expensive, and it's going to cost, I can't remember exactly how much, but it's costing a lot of money just to send people there. And like, it feels like if you could spend the money that we're going to waste on this on improving the asylum system, then it would be much more efficient and, more importantly, much more humane.
Exactly. I think one of the phrases we say a lot, and one of the things, I run our social media, so one of the things we tweet a lot is, being kind is such a simpler, not even, cost effective, but like cost effective, simpler way of dealing with these things. And it's, if you listen to what Rishi Sunak and all the members of this government are saying right now, it's it's a deterrent policy. We want people to see that we have a Rwanda scheme and they're not going to come, and that's just plainly not the truth. Because the Home Office has even published a report where they say that deterrent policies don't work, so it's quite funny. But B, because even after the scheme has been announced, the scheme was announced in April 2022, I think, people have kept coming because people are escaping imaginable horrors and imaginable, war and torture and persecution. People don't care that there's a policy. People care about reaching safety and being safe. So it's not a, it's dumb for me to say, it's not a deterrent. But they've said it's not a deterrent, but then they go ahead and say it's a deterrent. So we're in a position where we're like, it would be so much better if all that money, all that infrastructure was put into something that was building people up instead of trying to crush people. And I think that's inherently what we need. We just need politicians that are kinder to refugees and asylum seekers, and not politicians that are gonna, scapegoat them and use them for cheap political points, as we've seen with the footage that they've willingly put out of the horrifying, immigration raids that have been happening in the last couple of days here in the UK.
Those videos are so grim. It's just unreal to be able to see that on TV. This always gets overused, but it does. And I've said it loads, and I'll probably say it again, but it feels like 1930s Germany. I hate to use that, but I do use it. It just feels weird to be like, yeah, look, we're deporting all these illegals, or whatever term they use. It's just disgusting. It's really awful.
Well, we worked really closely with a Holocaust survivor called Joan back beginning of last year. So Joan reached out to us because she was seeing that the language that at that point Suella Braverman, so one Home Secretary away, because we've had a handful, as you mentioned. But Joan was seeing that the language that was being used to describe refugees and asylum seekers, so things like swarms, things like invasion, was, very indicative and very, reminded her of the language that was used to describe, her family back in the day. So we helped her, we supported her to go to one of Suella Braverman's constituencies, so to Fareham, and for her to just, ask Suella Braverman a question. So it wasn't, a protester addressing, it was literally Joan, who is 80-something and the kindest, most beautiful lady you'll ever meet, just, raising her hand and be like, hey, Suella, this reminds me of how my family was treated. Could we not use language that is more kind? And the response that she got back from Suella Braverman was, no, I don't regret the language that I use. I'm going to keep using it. And, we've seen them keep using them, and we've seen that get escalated with the videos that we're seeing, as we mentioned this week. But to your point, yes, fully, and Holocaust survivors are kind of like campaigning and seeing the same, and it's quite horrifying to see that they're not being listened to either.
I remember that. I think, did you have a video of that? Yes, I remember that. I don't know if I wrote about that, but I definitely, my colleagues at the other newspaper I work for definitely did. Yes, I remember that. I'm going to have to link. We'll link to that. So if it's still on social media, we'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
How did you feel like setting that up? Did you feel like, were you there when Joan went into the room? How did you feel?
Yeah.
Did it feel, you must have been nervous about that.
I was really nervous. I went with Joan. I was really nervous initially because our train got cancelled. And so we had to take 3 different kinds of trains and a taxi and rush a bit. And I was like, oh my God, I'm manhandling this poor woman across the UK. She did not care, by the way. 100% more resilient than I am. Absolutely crushed it. But yeah, I was very nervous, for her, just to make sure that, she got treated with the respect and the dignity she deserved. But also because I'm from Argentina, I can get quite easily deported. And unfortunately, the way that this government has now addressed protests is it's not the right that we should all have. It's apparently a privilege to, people that can't be deported or people that, have more privilege. So I was quite nervous, but it was all worth it in the end to support Joan and to get her, to be a small part in her being able to ask the question that she wanted to ask and support her in speaking her mind, which I know that she really wanted to do.
Yeah, that was such a really great action, and it was a really important thing to do, obviously, as well, because it does feel like the similarities between, obviously it's nowhere near as bad as what happened at the moment, but it does feel like you could. Anyway, let's stop. I'm going to stop talking there. Yeah. So you just mentioned another campaign. We're going to get onto this current campaign in a second. Are you okay for time?
Yeah, I'm good. No worries at all.
Awesome. The other campaign you mentioned, there was a flight set to go in, was it 2023 or 22?
22.
22 that was set to go to Rwanda, and it was stopped, and you were involved in that. Can you tell us about that?
Of course, yeah. So when we found out that, the Rwanda scheme was a thing and that there was going to be a flight, just for reference, the scheme was announced end of April, and I think the first flight was scheduled for sometime in the middle of June. And we instantly knew, A, that we had to campaign against it, but B, and again for reference, we were coming off a massive loss with the Nationality and Borders Now Act. So another one of the pieces of legislation, the quite inhumane pieces of legislation that the UK has, brought forward. And we had done everything that you're supposed to do. We had done petitions and write your MPs and showed up to demonstrations, and nothing had worked. So the sector was really, really, sad and quite burnt out. So when this was announced, we realized that we had to think differently and in a different way, and that, the UK government had literally no incentives to change or veer away from these flights. So we decided that we were going to focus on what was in the middle, because we didn't want to focus on Rwanda in the sense that, it's not about them. For us, it's about what the government in the place that we are at is doing, and not what, Rwanda is doing. A, because of, morality, but B, because the government has announced that they'll try and do this with lots of different countries. So it's definitely not about the country that, is taking people in, but about us shipping people away, basically. So we decided that, Rwanda's quite far away, and they were going to have to get there somehow. And we were like, okay, airlines, perfect. We'll focus on airlines. The UK government uses private airlines for their deportations. And we decided to look at the main ones that they used. So it was about 6. And just do a campaign focused on them realizing that it was too costly to profit from refugees' pain. Basically, that their reputations were going to take a massive hit if they were to go through with these kind of things. And when we had started that, in the middle of that, the first flight was stopped. And that was done, by the effort of lots of people within the refugee sector, but also by lots of people that, volunteering grassroots groups that, went and glued themselves to the tarmac and actually stopped, vans from getting to the airport and stopped that flight, and by incredible lawyers that got that, injunction from the European Court of Human Rights right, by the deadline, right in time. So then once that main flight got stopped, and that main flight was going to be run by a private Spanish charter airline called Privileged Style, we decided to focus on them. So for the next 4 months, we became the stuff of nightmares for Privileged Style. We had hundreds of thousands of people call them and email them. To this day, if you call Privileged Style, you can't go through to them directly. You go through a third-party service because they were so frazzled. We had people comment on the social media and their LinkedIn. We went to their headquarters. We showed up to the headquarters with a Worst Airline of the Year award, which was literally a 3D printed golden poop with an airplane flying into it, with a band and streamers. And most importantly, we focused on their customers as well. It just happened that Privileged Style flies two of the main football clubs in Spain, so Real Madrid and Barcelona. And it also happens that my brother is a massive football fan, so I knew that them together was actually a massive thing. So, we got people to email their CEOs of the football clubs and just be like, hey, what's going on? These 2 football clubs specifically are super pro-refugee. UNHCR, Barcelona is a spokesperson for the UNHCR. Real Madrid has, I think, at that point at least, had 2 refugees playing for their team. And we then went outside of the match. We just got really lucky that there was, a El Clásico match in Madrid. We didn't go in because the tickets were really expensive, but we stood outside and spoke to lots of people, and it was really interesting because we didn't know if we were going to speak to football fans, and they were going to be a bit like, oh, we don't really care about this. What are you talking about? And they all really cared. They all viewed their clubs as a safe space, as a place, where human rights were respected, where they had been able to grow and meet friends, and the fact that their clubs were kind of like idly standing by while this happened to, one of their biggest customers, they found really wrong. And literally, I think 4 days after we released that, we got a message from Privileged Style that quite literally just said, please stop. We won't fly anybody to Rwanda. please stop.
That is amazing. That's so good.
Which was quite funny. But yeah, that's kind of like what we did in 2022 against the flights, and then had to veer into legislation and the court case all of 2023 because the flights were grounded basically while the scheme went through the different levels of the UK judicial system.
And so, do you think that Real Madrid and Barcelona they threatened? They must have threatened. Like Privilege Town must have been like, "Whoa, we can't lose them."
I think that they must have seen that. I've been like, there's a difference between because their headquarters are in the middle of nowhere in Mallorca, so it's not that big of a deal. But we had managed, and I think I can't remember if we talked about that before we started filming, but we had managed to get quite a lot of broadcast opportunities in Spain, because I was there and I speak Spanish basically. So, a tip on the importance of having someone that speaks the local language if you're doing campaigns. And I'm sure they saw that in like the equivalent of the BBC in Spain, and saw us outside of like a really important football match of their two main customers and went a bit like, oh no, that's a lot.
I think I remember you. Did you do a video of like you mentioned the trophy with the plane flying into poo. You did a video of the band and stuff. So I think I remember that. I remember seeing that. I'm gonna have to link to that too. I remember all this stuff. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's such great campaigning.
But yeah, and now as I mentioned before, if you asked me if we'd had to have a Stop the Flights 2.0 in 2024, I would have been no. The Supreme Court crushed it, but here we are.
Yeah, that is the crazy thing that like it's just like. You can't get the law. You can't do something you want because it's illegal. So you change the law. It's just wild that happens. And you mentioned Rwanda. It like that's I think it's quite important to say. It's not that people against this is not like, oh, how could you send them to Rwanda? It's how could you send them away anywhere?
Exactly.
Like it does feel exploitative because I know Rwanda has its own hard history. It's had its genocide and it's a real like. I don't know about the politics. It's had the same leader for a long time. I don't know anything about, but that always is a red flag to me. But anyway, it just feels very exploitative, very like neo-colonialist for a rich country to be like, oh, let's send them to there. Very exploitative. And I think, I can't remember, but recently a few other countries, the UK government said a few other countries they were going to send them to. And I think one of them might have been in Central America. I can't remember what they were. Can you remember who they were?
Yeah, so I can't remember because there was a handful in South America, and I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I think they said Paraguay and Peru. They mentioned Belize. They mentioned a handful of countries in Africa as well. Obviously, nothing's come out of it yet, and knock on wood that it doesn't. But yeah, I remember quite strongly because as soon as I saw South American countries in there, I was like, I'm ready.
It's not just getting on the phone with friends.
But it's exactly that. It's not about where they're being sent to. It's about the fact that the UK government is, curtailing their, again, we can speak about their moral obligations, but also their obligations against, their obligations under international law on what they are supposed to do when people fleeing horrible things come, asking for sanctuary.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? Everyone has the right to claim asylum. And, so you can have the right to... I could claim asylum. I'm in Zagreb, in Croatia at the moment. I could claim asylum, but, it's not going to happen. I don't need it. But, everyone has the right to it, right? And so denying people entry into the country and kicking them out before they even get the chance, it's disgusting. It's really awful.
Exactly. Everyone, regardless of how they came, how they arrived and where they came from, has a right to claim asylum, to get their asylum case heard. Doesn't mean that they have a right to stay, but they have a right to get their claim heard. And that's what's not going to be happening if this scheme goes through. And that's why it's so important, because it goes, against such big, important pieces of, legislation that were put in place to keep us all safe after the Holocaust. and, you know, just blatantly ignoring them is not something that, you know, we should want and that we should stand by while it happens.
Exactly. And your current campaign, can you tell us about, so I think there's 2 airlines, right? Or one airline and an organization that runs airlines or something. Air Tank and Jet2. Can you tell us about this campaign that you're running now?
For sure. So funnily enough, as a bit of a throwback, Air Tanker was one of the airlines that we had identified back in 2022 that they could be flying refugees, and they actually ruled themselves out of the scheme really quickly. Like within a couple of weeks of social media posts, they sent their CEO, Paul Kimberly, sent us a message being like, you know, we're not involved in this at all. Please don't bother us. And I was like, great, grand. And then again, when we started hearing, you know, once the Safety of Rwanda bill was going to be, you know, quite imminently passing through Parliament and becoming law, we started looking at what airlines could be involved this time around. And Air Tanker became the main contender. And initially we were a bit like, wait, but you guys told us that you weren't going to do that. So, you know, we called them, we emailed them privately just to check that, you know, they weren't going to be doing this. Obviously got no response at all. What we did get on their behalf is, you know, an email saying, you know, we're not an airline, we are an airline services provider. And that's because they lease airplanes. But what I have to say to that is, but they run the flights with their own crew, with their own pilots, their own air hostesses. I'm assuming their own snacks. So that sounds a lot like an airline to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically we decided to focus on them because they, you know, they haven't confirmed nor denied, and they've been, you know, lots of journalists have reached out to them and the Home Office to see if they get any reply, and they're not confirming nor denying. So we are quite sure that it is going to be them. We then started our campaign against them. We've had over 84,000 emails sent to them. I'm sure they're not very happy with us. We've gone to their headquarters just again to try and talk to them. They, of course, you know, haven't replied to us. And similar to what we did back in the day with the football clubs and Privileged Style, we found out that Jet2 is one of the main, if not the main, commercial customer or partner of Air Tanker. So Jet2 leases 2 airplanes off of Air Tanker, 2 airplanes that, you know, might be used by Air Tanker if the talks that they're in, you know, are successful and they do in fact end up flying refugees to Rwanda. You know, Jet2 uses them to fly families on holiday to the Mediterranean mostly. So, you know, these airplanes are being used to bring joy to lots of families, might be used to, you know, tear families apart. So what we're doing with Jet2 is literally asking them to join us. You know, we're calling on them to influence their partner, to influence, you know, their commercial partner to stand on the right side of history. So, you know, the only thing we're doing is being like, you know, Jet2, you shouldn't stand idly by while a person that you give money to does this, you know, horrifying thing. And we've, again, had people reach out to Jet2 and have had over 34,000 emails sent to them. So I'm, again, very sure that they're not happy to talk to us. I actually called them this week, and the poor lady on the press phone was just like, look, I just don't think they want to talk to you. She was like, I really don't think they want to talk to you, which is a video that we have on our social media as well, on our social platforms. But what we're basically doing, just kind of like to summarize it, and what we are going to keep doing because we're not going anywhere, is telling Air Tanker, you know, we know you're in talks with the government to possibly fly these, you know, horrifying forced flights to Rwanda as part of their, you know, what is clearly a cash for human scheme. We know that that's the wrong thing to do. And Air Tanker has done really great things. They've been, you know, flying aid to Ukraine. They flew people to safety when back in 2021 from Kabul to the UK. You know, so they've done great things. So we're just like, why don't we just stay on that side of things and not on, you know, the horrifying forced flights thing? So we're just trying to get them to, pull themselves out of this scheme and refuse to fly these flights. And what we're trying to do with Jet2 is just put pressure on our tanker through one of their commercial partners. We're trying to put pressure on them from as many angles as we can, and that's just one of the ones we've chosen at the moment.
Yeah, it's really good, and I've seen your videos. I've seen the videos of you calling them up, and they're really great, really great videos. And I'm gonna put. I've emailed. I think I've done at least one of them. I might have emailed both Jet2 and Air Tank. So I'll send those. I'll include those in the show notes as well, so people can do that. I think it's such a really, really important campaign. What's been? I mean, obviously, you've had like a lot of people emailing. That I think you said it was like 34,000 for one, and then 50 something for the other. Maybe it was more. Can you talk a bit about the public response to your campaign? It sounds like it's going very well.
The public response has been amazing, and I think it's always something that brings me lots of hope. I think it's really easy when, things are getting more and more inhumane and horrifying, and you see the not only the horrifying kind of like legislation and approaches coming from the UK, but all the horrible things that are happening across the world. I think it's really easy to lose hope. But then seeing that as soon as we launch this, that people want to do something, that people want to stand for what's right, that people want to defend refugees and immigrants, and people want to be kind and a helping hand. And seeing, we've had, I think it's over 110,000 emails sent between the two actions in about 2 weeks. And that's massive. And the amount of people that have messaged us being like, what can we do? How do we help? Which, more information is coming. Just follow us on our socials. We'll promise we'll give you more chances to do things. But to see that people are doing that, to see the responses to the immigration raids that have been happening this week in the UK, and to see things like what happened in Peckham yesterday and in Lunar House, and the things that are happening outside of detention centres, and how people are rallying around the refugee community, just brings me lots of hope. And I think that's what we should be focusing on, because we can't give them the power of beating us. And seeing, we say it all the time, and it's again really kind of like corny, but and it's, people power works. And it does, it's done hundreds of things, through history. But in our example, only in the Rwanda, scheme example, it stopped the flight back then. It got the main airline out. It made it so much harder for the UK government to find an airline. It's making it much harder now. It's stopping people being put in deportations, even if it's just for a short amount of time. And it's showing the mass movement of solidarity that is happening across the world, but very busily in the UK in the last couple of days. So we must focus on that, and we must hold on to that, because the times that are coming are going to be hard. And I think we need to focus on that we have a movement that is ready to fight it, and that we can win.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons I do this podcast is I want to focus. The podcast focuses on the activist-led or campaigners, people that are. I've not had anyone from a government in this podcast, because I want the podcast to appeal to normal people that are just like living their lives, going to work and stuff. And I hope to them they can see that civil society can have the power to change things. You don't have to rely on politicians. They can be great help, but that's one of the focus of this podcast. And what you said was brilliant, and it answered my next question pretty much. But the last question I ask everyone is, how do you feel about the future? Which I'm going to ask. But I just want to, you mentioned the thing that happened in Peckham yesterday. So I was on a bus yesterday from Bosnia to Croatia. And I didn't look at the news or anything all day yesterday. I know that there was a deportation and people stood around a bus, it looks like, stood around the police to stop a deportation. I mean, I don't know if you probably weren't there, but what happened? Can you just tell me, fill me in on what happened there?
Yeah. So I have actually lots of friends that were there because it literally happened about a 5-minute walk from my house.
Oh, I used to live near there. We'll talk about this as well after we've finished recording.
Yeah, but
Basically, what's been happening in the last handful of days is the UK government, the Home Office, has announced that they were going to start taking people into detention for the Rwanda scheme, and for the Bibby Stockholm in some cases as well. And that meant that together with the how do I put this? The Home Office has just changed its guidance as well on how long people can be detained, but how people can be detained. So for example, whereas before there was a bit more of an assurance that vulnerable people wouldn't be detained, now everyone is up for grabs. So torture survivors, victims of sexual abuse, victims of human trafficking. So really, really some of the most vulnerable people within the system. And people are just being detained in horrifying ways. They're being detained overnight when they're not ready to, see the police at their door. They're being detained without a legal representative, without translators, in really violent ways. And one of the things that happened yesterday in Peckham was 3 people were going to be moved to the Bibby Stockholm, and again quite forcibly removed. And there was a big coach, and hundreds of people, and literally within 2 hours rallied around the coach to stop it from moving, to stop it from, so stop them from detaining these people and removing them to the Bibby Stockholm. And, we can debate whether they won or not, but the deportation didn't happen. These people were able to at least see another day without being removed to the Bibby Stockholm. And if you ask me, that's enough. That's a win. Even if they are removed ultimately. And we're seeing the same thing happen in places like Lunar House, which for people that might not know is a big detention centre where people are being taken to, and other places in North London, but also in other places. I know in Glasgow similar things are happening, and across the Midlands it's the same. And I think what's really important, because we saw yesterday James Cleverly, which is the current Home Secretary of the UK. We don't know for how long, because again they keep changing on us, but we saw him tweet, a picture or a video, I can't remember, of what was happening in Peckham yesterday, and saying, we're not going to let a small amount of students, and being quite, dismissive. And it wasn't a small amount of students. It was a big group of people coming together to stand with, these asylum seekers and these refugees. And it was, because I know for a fact it was people from the neighborhood. It was, neighbors from literally the big flats in front of it that started coming down. It was people that teach English to refugees in colleges. So it was members of the community rallying to support members of the community, because that's what they are. They live in Peckham, they live in Camberwell, they live in our area, they are members of our community. So that's exactly what it was, and that's exactly what's going to keep happening, because as I say, we are a massive movement of kind, passionate people, and we're going to stand by refugees, and we're going to stand by members of our communities, and we're not going to let it go.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm so, and I think this happened in Peckham a few years ago. I remember it happening, and at that time I was abroad again, so I couldn't make it to that. But like something that it just made me think that I remember I've said before, people have said many times, like, the law is no barometer of morality. Just because it's the law to deport people doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, right? Like, the Holocaust was legal, slavery was legal, blah, blah, blah. Loads of things have been legal that have been wrong. So it's always good. It's really good. I found it really heartwarming to see people standing up against that kind of stuff. So I'm going to ask my last question now, Agustina. Unless there's anything else you want. Was there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask? Anything you've got on your notes or something that you want to talk about I didn't mention before the last question?
don't think so. I think we went through everything that I expected us to go through.
Good. I normally think, I should have asked that after we finish recording. So, and when I start editing, it's when I'm like, oh yeah, I should have asked that. Okay. So, my last question is a question I ask everyone on the podcast is, how do you feel about the future? You kind of addressed this already, I think. And I usually hope that when I ask this question, people have some kind of ray of sunshine in the answer. So, how do you feel about the future?
Bright. Yeah, like I know it's a really weird thing to say, especially right now when everything is basically on fire and not in a good way. But yeah, I think it's literally what we were just saying, which is, we can focus on the fact that, more inhumane and horrifying policies are sparking up not only in the UK, but anywhere and everywhere across the world, and feel really defeated. But I think what we must focus on and what we need to focus on is on us. And I mean that on us as, not as, Freedom from Torture as an organization at all. I mean on us as caring people that are ready to stand for what's right. And I think the number of people that are willing to do that is growing. It only in the UK, I think it was something ridiculous, like 85% of the UK stands behind a compassionate and fair asylum system. That's massive. That's way higher than I thought it was going to be, when they announced that number. And again, and I'm a bit like a record going on and on about this, but, people power works. And we have this phrase in Spanish, which is, it's my friends that protect me and it's my friends that defend me. It's not the state, it's not anyone else, it's my friends.
How do you say that in Spanish?
A mí me cuidan mis amigas, no el Estado. It's a very feminist phrase, so it's it's girl coded, if you want to put it that way, but it can work for anyone. But we are here and we're not going anywhere, and I think we're seeing that movement everywhere across the world. We're seeing, especially younger people, but people of any ages, just showing up for what matters and showing up for what's important and standing for what's right and standing for people and refugees and immigrants. And I think that's what we must hold on to. And I hope that's a bit of a ray of sunshine. And I promise, and again, I've got the examples to back me up, I promise it works. I promise people power really works. We just need to believe a bit more in it. And that's it.
That was a great answer. Thank you very much. I like that answer a lot. I always ask people to put a ray of sunshine into this answer. Not everyone does, but that was brilliant.
No.
Thanks, Agustina. That was really great. And I think we'll finish it here.
Amazing. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, that was episode 57 of the Civil Fleet podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks again to Agustina for talking to me, and to everyone at Freedom from Torture, especially Lara, who helped organise this. Go check out Freedom from Torture. They are an amazing organisation doing brilliant work against the Rwanda Safety Act, the so-called Rwanda Safety Act, I should probably say. Anyway, they are doing amazing stuff. Go check them out. Their social media feeds are brilliant. Right, what do we talk about at the end of the episode? We say go check out the website, civilfleet.com, for exclusive stories, news reports, and that kind of thing. Also, if you want to help us to continue doing what we're doing, there's a couple ways you can do that. The most effective way you can help us to do that is by making a small donation at co-fi.com/civilfleet. That trip to Bosnia wasn't cheap, so I could do with recouping a few of those costs, but obviously no pressure whatsoever. You can make a small donation there at co-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. Our cost is super small, but any help will be greatly appreciated. And the other way you can help the Civil Fleet podcast is by sharing us around on social media, telling your friends about the podcast, getting people who's never listened to it before to check it out. You can also give us ratings on podcast apps and all that stuff, like and subscribe on YouTube and all that. We'll be back soon with all the stuff about Bosnia. Until then, cheers.